Retired U.S. Navy Captain Bob Wells. He's a former national security advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Captain Wells, the Iranians are threatening to boost their uranium enrichment. Do they have the standing, I guess, to make those threats?
Of course, they have the opportunity to do it unilaterally, but I think looking at the JCPOA and the framework that really legitimized the nuclear program of Iran, it's in their interest not to exit that particular JCPOA, and they've really been trying to provoke the United States by using the Europeans as leverage, creating fear and a threat of war. So I think we've been very prudent with regard to our response. We've worked very closely with our European allies, especially with the French. And as I understand, President Macron has just had some new relationship and discussions with President Rouhani of Iran to extend a deadline date. So here we go again. The Iranians know, and they're very calculating with regard to trying to achieve leverage with the United States. But they want the JCPOA framework still, and they could ratchet up the uranium prospects within that framework, but they also want the economic benefit of the JCPOA, and they really want to get rid of the U.S. sanctions.
Well, President Trump recently canceled military strikes that were apparently in the works against Iran. It sounds like you applaud his revocation of that military strike order?
I think his logic and looking at the coordination, the United States has a lot of tools in our toolbox, and I understand there were some cyber options that were put on the table with regard to a proportional response, and with the command and control systems that shot down the Navy drone. So he's looking at other options that are on the table. I think his pronouncement with regard to limiting the loss of life relative to the loss of a drone. I've been in national security with the Bush administration and Clinton administration. Those are valuable presidential calculations.
The Europeans seem to be, I mean, at the same time that Britain has seized this Iranian tanker, which was apparently, according to Britain, delivering restricted oil to Syria or intended for Syria. But as you note, the French are reopening dialogue with the Iranians. Is that showing that Europe has a split?
I think it's apples and oranges if you think about the destination of the Iranian tanker, or the Grace tanker, which is a Panamanian flag tanker taking oil to Syria. Looking at the actual impact of the money that would go to the Syrian regime and what it's actually doing in terms of policy to the Syrian people. So it's a Syrian policy decision that was made with regard to the Iranian shipment of the oil in that particular tanker to that northwest port in Syria. With regard to the French, they're looking at trying to figure out a way diplomatically to maintain the integrity of the JCPOA without having the Iranians begin their enrichment process again. So that's a different aspect with regard to the Iranians themselves. I really think the Iranians, in terms of a nation state, need to come to the table, as well as we look at the IRGC and some of the fundings that come from the actual oil transshipment, which would also benefit them inside Syria. So it's a very complex circumstance, but both international countries, United Kingdom, France, operated under their own interest, and the EU sanctions regime on the Grace 1 interdiction by the British commandos.
But it seems like Iran's economy is in danger of collapse as a result of the sanctions. It doesn't seem like they have an awful lot of leverage to be threatening the West, do they?
Well, yes, they do, because they have the IRGC, and they have a terrorist organization that could threaten the interest of inside of borders of other European countries, even the United States, or other interests of the United States in different parts of the world. So they do have a threatening capability. Also, if you look at the result of the sanctions, as I understand it, 2 million barrels a day of oil before the sanctions were put on. Now they're down to about 200,000 barrels of oil. You've got payment and challenges of payment within Iran and their political economy. You also have those dollars going to the IRGC as opposed to the people of Iran. So they're in a precarious circumstance, John, as you just mentioned.
Captain Bob Wells, thanks for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you, John.